shares of Cerebras Systems are down about 10% right now. They had jumped yesterday on some news that AMD is teaming up with Cerebras Systems on a new server designed to slash response times, taking direct aim at Nvidia. Joining us to explain the deal, the technology, Andrew Feldman, co-founder and CEO of Cerebras Systems. So this is how it's going to work. You basically have a Helios server and a Cerebras server in combination. Right. How is that going to work, and what is the sort of split on the workload?
Sure. Good to be back, Ed. Thanks for having me. The way to think about it is that the inference problem is comprised of two parts. We call the first part processing the prompt, and we call the second part generating the answer. And those two parts of the problem have very different computational requirements. And that opens the door to address them with two different machines. The processing of the prompt, the analyzing the query, that part is a problem that can be parallelized. And for that type of work, GPUs are very, very good. And Helios will be the best. The second part of the work, which is generating the answer at extraordinary speeds, Cerebras is the best in the world, bar none. And so by bringing these two solutions together so that the Helios processes the prompt, Cerebras generates the answer, we create a single inference flow that is the fastest in the world and has this extraordinary throughput.
Andrew, I'm not trying to make a scandal or a negative out of it, but like for you, like how does the sales channel work, right? So AMD has like this pipeline of projects, and those that infrastructure is like, okay, we're going to use Helios systems, but now they can also get the Cerebras server alongside it. How have you guys agreed to split the revenues? How have you guys agreed to do this in a way that is economically equitable? It's a really interesting deal.
Sure. I think speed makes markets bigger, right? It doesn't make markets smaller. This isn't about carving up something that's of fixed size, right? Fast inference is productive inference. And where AI is productive, people are willing to spend more and more and more. And so the first application of this solution will be in the Cerebras cloud, and that will be later this year. And shortly thereafter, it will be available more generally. I think we have an enormous backlog. They have an enormous backlog. I think we have customers around the world who are demanding fast inference at extraordinary scale.
Right.
And the solution we're building is head and shoulders above anything else.
I find the technology approach really interesting. The parallel example is Nvidia and Grok with a Q, and Grok 3 LPX. And in that case, it's integration of the Grok system into the same server design, right? You didn't take that approach. Did you talk about that? What were the options on the table?
Well, we don't quite know what Nvidia is doing. They haven't really delivered it to market yet, and so we are interested to see how that works out. What we were able to do, because we use open standards-based technology for our I/O, we were able to build a solution with AMD quickly and easily. Because we sort of support open standards. Remember, we've also done this with Trainium from AWS. And so we adopted the same approach, that by being open, by being standards-based, right, half the leading chip makers, AMD, AWS with Trainium, are now using our solution in a disaggregated approach for high-speed inference delivery. So I think the answer is by being open and by being standards-based, we can rapidly partner with other members of the ecosystem.
You've also been a busy guy. We were talking off air about how busy everything is. You just did a very big IPO. Kind of interesting to know, like, who approached who? Whose idea was this?
Look, I've known Lisa for a long time. She was CEO when my last company was acquired by AMD. I've watched sort of her do extraordinary things with that company. The returns over her tenure as CEO are mind-boggling. And so we are in constant communication. We are close with her CTO, Mark Papermaster. These are people we've known for decades. And so we're in constant communication, talking about how we might collaborate, what we might do together. And this was an idea that emerged from those discussions and made perfect sense.
In the Nvidia Grok with a Q example, which I appreciate, not your companies, like it's completely separate, but the mechanism was an acqui-hire. As you know, prior to your IPO, we reported at Bloomberg that some of the fabless chip names held talks or expressed interest in also acquiring Cerebras prior to its listing. Did you discuss any of those kind of mechanisms with Lisa about the merits of her making an equity investment or some of the structures that AMD has deployed in other of their arrangements?
Sure. AMD has been an equity investor for quite some time. They were an investor in some of our mid and later stage rounds. And so we have been talking with them and engaged in discussions on how we might work together for a long time, as we are with many of the players. And that's the advantage of being open. That's the advantage of not being a walled garden. That's the advantage of not having a proprietary I/O technology, but using standards-based, high-speed Ethernet technology. We can engage with AMD, we can engage with AWS, we could engage with Google, we could engage with anybody who builds a part that would integrate into an extraordinary solution.
Andrew, really quickly, I had a long conversation with SK Group Chair Che Tae-wan very recently, and he said basically the difference between China's approach to AI and the US is China's going for the lowest dollar per token, whereas America's still in a place where it's focused on the highest quality tokens. From the non-HBM standpoint, would you kind of weigh in on that?
Yeah, so we don't use HBM, and that's one of the real advantages we have. So we can generate tokens for less because we're not dependent on this sort of supply chain constrained part.
Right.
I think it's unclear whether the Chinese model makers are actually developing for less or piggybacking on technology that other people have invented.
Right.
I think that's an open question, one I don't have the answer to, but I know there's some very strongly held views that they are stealing, distilling. I'm not sure, but what I do know is I don't understand their cost to build these models.
Right. Interesting.
OpenAI is one of our larger customers. We do have an understanding of the amount of compute they need to build, and we have an understanding of the amount of compute that other frontier U.S. labs have. We don't really have an understanding of what the cost is. So the question is really, are they making lower cost AI because they're borrowing other people's technology, or do they have some really interesting inventions that allow them to make AI for less? That's an open question and one that relates to your previous segment and what we should do about that if it is the case.
And very, very quickly, you've seen the letter this morning, leaders in U.S. technology emphasizing America's need to focus on open weight. Do you have a viewpoint on that?
Look, I think right now the market's been made by OpenAI with a fast follow by Anthropic. And they have invested an enormous amount of money, a mind-boggling amount of money, and they have made this market. And I think the followers, both from China and others, are trying to capture this with a fast follow strategy. And I think it's unclear to me what the right approach is. I think obviously we want lower cost AI. What we can control at Cerebras is by building, like we're doing with AMD, solutions that deliver more tokens per unit power, that deliver more
Right.
tokens per dollar, that deliver those tokens faster so they're more productive. So you can pay more, right? The problem isn't that tokens are expensive. The problem is that it's hard to measure how much productivity you're getting from tokens. And what we know is that when you make things faster, they drive up productivity. And so these are the dimensions we can work on, Ed, and we're diligently working on them every day.